Begin the current Daf, Mesechtas Moed Katan Daf Chavches, second to the last Daf in this Mesechta, where we continue explaining the halacha of our previous Mishnah, which we spoke about that we in our Chalash Moed we don't put the mita of the mess in the rechayiv. So then our Mishnah said that similarly, in general, we never place that of the woman her mita in the rechayiv because of kavod. And we explained that halacha. Some of the things discussed in today's daf are, like we said, that the beards of women are never put in the middle of the street because in case blood flows from them and stains their shrouds. The Gemara discusses whether this applies to all women. We discussed Mrs. Karas, Mrs. B'dei Mrs. Neshika, the ages when we attribute death to a divine punishment, normal death, or to a special closeness from Hashem. Malach HaMavis, the Gemara records several interactions between various Chacham and the Malach HaMavis. Me'anos, Me'kainos, Metapchis, there's a different terminologies where the women are permitted to lament in several ways or to clap their hands in sorrow, Chalamayid, and other minor time. Inui, the Gemara gives many examples of popular lamentations, and B'nei Rabbi Shmuel, the Gemara records the consolations of several Chacham to Rabbi Shmuel upon the death of his son. So begin the current daf. Chavzayin Mabei is the last line of the Amr. As we said, the Mishnah told us that on Chalash Moed we don't want to be margel haspedim, so we don't do it in the street. And then the Mishnah said, and women, we never put their dead bodies on the beds in the street. We are covered because of the honor. Now, the Gemara explains, the Nadoris explained, they said, Moshe, we didn't learn that this is a problem, as you can say in Chav Chesem and Aleph, Elachaya. That's only if a woman died from childbirth, where she's flowing blood. So that would be disgraceful for her to be with the stained burial shrouds in the street. But other women, when they pass away, we do place them in the street. He disagrees, says, no, even other women, we don't place them in the street. By Golavaya, it says the passage in the Midbar. It says by Tamasha Miriam, that Miriam passed away over there, but the Kavasham, she was buried over there. What does that mean? They're there. That Samach Lamisa Kavura, where she died is where she was buried. Where therefore that means to say we're not making these stops in the street and being maspid, rather right near the death is the burial, and therefore you see that all women are not placed into the Rechaim. Another teaching from Amr Belazar, once he's discussing that of Miriam passing away, says Af Miriam ben Neshika Mesa. Miriam Hanaviyah also died with what's called Mrs. Neshika, like from the kiss of God. Because Asya Sham and Moshe, it says Sham as we just quoted the passage before, but Tamasha Miriam. It says by Moshe being in Devarim, it says Vayam Sham Moshe Eved Hashem Be'eretz Moed al Pi Hashem. So just like by Moshe it says Sham, it's al Pi Hashem, which is with Hashem's mouth. So too by Miriam. Now, so why doesn't it say, like by Moshe, that she passed away by the mouth of Hashem? Because it's disgraceful to say it in that way, and therefore didn't record it explicitly, but she also passed away with Mrs. Neshika, just like Moshe Ben. Now, once again, another related teaching to Mrs. Miriam. Amar Abami says, Lama Nismucha Mrs. Miriam, why does it say in the Torah, when it talks about the death of Miriam, right next to the Parshas Paraduma, because by Parshas Chukas, which it mentions the Paraduma, it has Mrs. Miriam right next to it. Why? So let me to tell you, Ma Paraduma, just like the red heifer is Mechaperes, it atones. Meaning, as Taisa explains, meaning Paraduma is actually not a kapar, it's actually a tahara, but it does atone on a deeper level than Maisa Egel. As the Medrash brings, as Rashi brings on Chumash, that it's compared to the son of the maidservant that had messed up the whole palace, and the king says, bring the mother, let her clean up. That's the same thing. The egel was the calf, the baby, and then they say, bring the mother, bring the paraduma to go help clean up. So just like the paraduma is mechaperes for the egel, so to the death of the righteous atones. And therefore that's why it says in near each other to tell you that the misa of the Miriam is mechaperes, just like the paraduma is mechaperes. Similarly, Amr Belazar says, why is the death of Aaron said right next to the parsha where it talks about the Kohanic garments? To tell you, just like the Kohanic garments they atone, as the Gemara in Tzavachim, the Peches and the base taste brings elaborates at each garment what it atoned for. So it's come to tell you that the death of the righteous are also atoning, again, that same idea. Now once we're talking about death, and about different types of death, like Mrs. Neshika, so come on the brisa that elaborates on how a person dies, that illustrates what type of person he is. If Meis Pisom, Pitom, if a person dies suddenly without being sick, zui misa chatufa. So that's a snatch death. Chala yemechad b'meis. So he's sick one day and then he dies. Zui misa dechufa. This is a push death. Which Tais says, he said, I don't know what it is and what's the difference between them, but it definitely seems like snatched is more of a sudden than pushed, and again, each one would be a severity that a person was just suddenly taken away. Where Chanan B'Gamliel, he says, no. If a person was sick one day and then he died, it's not called a push death. Zui Mises Magefa, that's the death of like a plague. Shemek is the pasuk in Yechezkel. Ben Adam, son of man, Hinni lekech mimcha, behold, I'm going to take from you es machmer einechem b'magefa, that which is desirable in your eyes in a plague. Yeah, so except when it says after that, and they spoke to the people in the morning, but Thomas Ishtab, my wife died in the evening, as Taisa explains that she became sick and she died, so she was sick for that one day, and then she died in the evening, so you see that being sick for one day and then dying is a Misa Mageva. Now the Tanakhama continues, it says, Shnei Yom B'meis. So let's say the person is sick for 2 days and then he dies. Zui Misa Dechuya, that's a hastened death. Gimel, 3 days and then dies. Gara, that's rebuke. Arba, if someone's sick for 4 days and then he dies, that's Nazifa, that's scorn. Chamisha, if he's sick for 5 days and dies, Zui Misas Kaladam. That's the death of every single person. That's a regular death. And Amr B'chani says, Michael, what's a pasuk that shows this? It says a pasuk in the bottom. When it talks about Moshe Rabbeinu, it says, Hein Karbi Yemechel Amas, behold, it got close to your days to die. Now, the word hen, as the Gemara is going to shortly tell us, means chad, means one. Karvu is in the plural, that's trey, that's 2 days, getting close. Yomecha, your days, that's also trey, that's plural, that's 2. Hachamisha, that's a total of 5. But Trace actually says, not really so precise, because we actually don't find Moshe Rabbeinu being sick. And on the day that he died, he was very strong, like Rashi explains the Chumash, but one thing it's alluded to here in this pasuk that shows that the death of a normal person is being sick 5 days and then dying, because as the Gemara explains, the word hen is chad, because shekem b'lashon Yevanim, because in the Greek language, karin la'achas hein, they call the word one, the word is hen. So hein, karbu yamecha, is 1 plus 2 plus 2 is 5, that's the death of a regular person. Now, not just in, let's say, day of death as it's happening in the moment, but what ages a person also makes a difference. If someone dies when he's 50 years old, that's a death of karas. You always know for certain sins there's something a person gets cut off. That's at age 50. Now, Tais brings from the Yushalmi. What's the source for this? Because it says by the Levium al tachrisu shevet hakahasi, since shevet kahas was busy doing the avodah with the holy items, it was danger that they might die. So it says al tachrisu, that they're not going to get cut off, not going to get karas. Now it says Tais from the Yushalmi, and when do they do that avodah? Till 50. Like it says, from 50 they stop doing it. So you see that they're not going to get cut off, meaning they're going to make it through their service, which is 50 years old. But you see that up until 50 is that of karas. Another interpretation, which Tais doesn't really like, he says that we know our years are 70 years. Now, if you take away 20, which a person not punished, so that for 50, see that 50 would be that of the age of karas. But either way, we see that up until 50 is considered that of the death of karas. Now, if someone dies at 52, that's the death of Shmuel from Ramot, meaning the famous Shmuel Hanavi, he lived till 52. Shishim, if a person dies up until 60, it's actually different gersayis. Either that's called Mises Kal Adam, or which is the death of like a regular person, or it's Misa B'dei Shemayim, which is similar. It's also like a natural death, but Misa B'dei Shemayim usually would connote that of like because a person deserved death, like we say, but just it's not as severe as karas. Now, where do we know that up until 60 is Misa B'dei Shemayim? So Tais again brings from the Yushalmi. We learn that from the Mesa Midbar, where we say that none of them died less than 60 because it was only for those 20 and over, and it was for 40 years. So therefore, you see, Misa B'dei Shemayim is up until 60. Now, Omar Zuchi says, Mikra, what's the pasuk that shows this? Because the Chsiv, it says in the pasuk in Eir, it says, Tavoi Bekelach will come with maturity, and lay cover to the grave in its time. So that's like, meaning when it's like, when is the max of dying early? Bekelach begematria shiten haba. Bekelach, that numerical value is 60. So after that, it's not early anymore. It matures after 60. Before 60 is still young, and that would be considered Misa B'Yeshanayim. Shivim, if someone lives till 70, so that's considered Seim, that's considered old. Shmoinim, if he lives till 80, that's considered Gevurah, that's considered strength, because the says in the Pasuk can tell him, you may should send him the days of our years, Bahem, and then Shivim Shana are 70 years, but Megvurah, Shmoinim Shana, one might, at 80 years. Now, Amar Rabba, he actually explains, he says, Mechamishim, from 50 years on and older, up until 60, Zui misses cars. That whole decade would be a punishment of cars. So why is not counted? Why didn't we mention it with that of cars? We only said 50. We didn't say 50 till 60. It's actually that's just for the dignity of Shmuel Haramasi because he lived till 52. So we didn't want to say 50 till 60. We only said 50. But the truth is, says Rab, it's really 50 till 60. Would be considered a Mesa Karas. Now, remember the story that's a well-known minhag that some people have. Rabbi Yosef gave a bar shita when Rabbi Yosef got to 60, he made a big celebration for the rabbis in yeshiva. Amay says, Nafkili mikaras. I've already been excluded from the punishment of karas. I made it to 60, and we said that from 50 to 60 would be punishment of karas. They said I made it to 60. So Abai, his student, said to him, wait a second, don't get so excited. Although the master has been removed from the chorus of the years, the chorus the Yomi, but the chorus of the days, meaning in our sugi we mentioned two sudden deaths. We mentioned in age, and we also mentioned in days. So Mina Figmar, has the master been removed from the chorus of days, meaning you might die a Misa Chatufa, a snatched death, which a snatched death is also like being cut off. So although you made it in years, but maybe chorus of the days you're still going to get. So Malay said to him, we're not all or nothing. But at least you have half in your hand, at least for the chorus of years. I've been saved, and therefore that's enough reason to celebrate, even though we don't know what's going to be with the chorus of the days. Now, the Gemara brings a story. Rav Huna passed away suddenly. The rabbis were afraid and worried because we said if someone dies suddenly, that's a Misa Chatufa. And Rav Huna was getting Karas Diyomi. So Tanalo Zugud de Mahadayev, there was this peer of students from Hadayev that said, no, that considered as a Misa Chatufa is only if a person did not reach to the age of Gurus, he didn't make it to 80. If he made it to 80, that's actually considered the kiss of death. Someone just dies suddenly without getting sick, it's actually considered as a blessing. Actually, it's not considered as a curse. Amar Rava, he says, a well-known teaching, Chaye Bane Umezayne, regarding life, and this is why we're talking about how long a person lives, so the Gemara brings this in, and children, and Parnasa, Loi B'schus Italia Milsa, doesn't depend on the person's merit, Ela B'mazla Italia Milsa, rather it's totally in the person's divine flow from Shemayim, and that's not dependent on the person. And we always say those things. Those three things are totally in Mazel, which Taisa says, the Gemara in Shabbos famously says, in Mazel Yisrael. So how can you say it totally in Mazel? So Taisa says that sometimes they do change through Mazel, but others bring the gear says, Taisa in Shabbos says, actually not through Mazel, but through a schus God, through a great schus. Sometimes it doesn't change, Taisa brings Mar Mekaymis either one, but it is totally in Mazel. We're just saying that when we say in Mazel Yisrael, a person could ride above that. But in general, these three things about children, about life, and about Parnas is totally in Mazel. And the Gemara illustrates this with two great Torah giants. The Rabbi and Rav Chizda. Kavayir Rabban Tzaddik, they were both rabbis that were righteous. Mar Matzah was a mitra, Rabbi would daven and the rain would come. Mar Matzah was a mitra, Rav Chizda would daven and the rain would come. But look how starkly different their lives were. Rav Chizda, Choyed Tishin B'Tartnishnin. Rav Chizda lived to 92 years old. So again, we see regarding how old a person lives. And Rabbi Chai Rabban, Rabbi lived only till 40. More of a Beit Rav Chizda, in the house of Rav Chizda was Shitin Hiluli, that 60 chasnas, meaning he had like 60 sons. And Beit Rabba, Shitin Tichli, and in the house of Rabbi they had 60 deaths, which Taisa says, some say that's not precise, in order, and usually 60 is a guzma, exaggeration, but again, in Rav Chizda, he lived long, he had so many weddings and simchas from one day to one to the next, and Rabbi was going from one levaya to the next one. And Beit Rav Chizda, by the house of Rav Chizda, was smida lekalvi. They had fine flour for the dogs, and the dogs didn't even need it. These fat dogs, they didn't even need like the fine flour. They had whatever they needed. And in many houses, the dogs get better fed than and by Rabba, in the house of Rabba, Nama de Sar Linchi, they just wanted barley bread for people, but they couldn't find that. So it's interesting to notice that these things that people complain about, this is what your mazel is what your life is supposed to be, and it's not a reflection of who you are as a person, about having children, about having parnasa, and about how long you live. Another teaching from V'amar Rava, actually a statement, he says, Hanitlas Mili, Ba'aikam Shemai. He says the following three things I asked from Shemayim, from heaven, and Tarti Yavali, two of them was given to me, but Chadul Yavali, one was not given to me. I asked for Chochmasi de Ravuna, I asked for the wisdom of Ravuna, I asked for Uti de Rav Chizda, for the wealth of Rav Chizda, and B'Yavali. And he said, that I was given. But in V'Sanusi de Rav Ravuna, which is interesting that we're saying this idea that Rav Chizda, although he seemed to have a more beautiful life, and Rabbi was able to get that. But when he wanted the humility of Rabbi Ravuna, Lo Yavali, that was not given to me. So although Rabbi had the harder life, but there's certain humility.
Humility is across its own hard work.
Right, exactly.
The other two is you can't be given without your hard work.
Right. So although Rav Chizda essentially had the blessed life, but that's not really what the essence of life is, and that he wasn't able to get. So the Gemara segues into stories with the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death. Rav Sa'idim, who was a Chud de Rava, he was the brother of Rava. Rabbi Yosef came in Rava, he was sitting in front of Rava. Chazid Dav Kamanam, he saw that he was dozing off, which Rashi says doesn't mean just dozing off, like he was geisesing. He was like in the throes of death. So Amalei, so Rava, who was like passing off into the next world, said to Rav Sa'idim, says, Lim le mar, let you tell the Malach HaMavis, the Lil Tzara, not to pain me. So Amalei said to his brother, Mar Lav Shushbinehu, aren't you the friend of the Malach HaMavis? You were always friendly with him. Amalei said to him, Kiven the Imser Mazla, once a person's mazel is given over, that his mazel is weakened, which is like when a person's ready to die, he doesn't pay attention to me now. So Amalei said to him, L'schazli Mar, let the master appear to me after you pass away. So he appeared to him after he passed away. Amalei said to him, Havalei Lamar Tzar, did the master have pain when you passed away? Amalei said to him, Kidiv did the Kusilta, it was like the puncture of a lancet, which is like a little, and that was the removal of the soul from the body. The Gemara brings another story. Rabbi Yosef Kamed Rav Nachman. This is, the previous story was Rav Sa'irim, the brother of Rav, when Rav was passing away. Then there had obviously previously been a story that Rabbi Yosef Kamed Rav Nachman, he stood in front of Rav Nachman. Chazid Kamanam, and he saw that he was dozing off, meaning passing on. Amalei said to him, so Rav Nachman said to Rabba, tell the Malach HaMavis not to pay me. Amalei said to him, aren't you a significant person yourself? You tell him. Amalei said to him, Man chashav, who's chashav, man safed, man rikia, all different terms of significance, of respect, and of being mesukin, to like ask the Malach HaMavis. The Malach HaMavis is not going to pay any attention to me. Amalei, so either way, he told him, L'schazli Mar, let the master appear to me when you pass away. So L'schazli appeared to him. Amalei said to him, Havalei Lamar Tzar, did the master have pain? Amalei says, Kamishchel Benisa Mechalava, it's like taking a hair out of milk, which it comes out very easily. And that's the concept that how much a person is invested in the physical and the mundane in his body, that's how much more difficult it is to remove him from his body. But these tzaddikim that were like very righteous and very spiritual, it was like taking out like a hair from the milk. It wasn't so painful. But the Yomi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he said the following thing. He said, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would tell me, Zilbahu Alma, go back to the world Kadhabas like you were, Labin, I wouldn't want it. Because enough fish be Susei. It's very frightening, the experience of the Malach HaMavis, of the angel of death. He says, I wouldn't want to do that ever again. You remember, there's another story of Belazar, Ka'achal Truma, is eating Truma, is Chazile. Malach HaMavis appeared himself to him. So Amalei said to him, Truma Ka'achal, and he says, I'm eating Truma. Isn't it called holy things? As the Marav Ranchberg explains it in Ice Base, he says, if you're going to kill me, it's going to be Matamad my Truma. And it says, as Mishmer's Truma, so you have to safeguard it in Tahara. So, so the moment passed, and he didn't die at that chapter because of what he said to the Malach HaMavis. Remember, brings Rav Sheshes, is Chazalei B'Shukar. Rav Sheshes, the Malach HaMavis appeared to him in the street. Amalei b'shuka kebehema? You're going to kill me here in the street like an animal? Eisel gabe beisa, come to the house. Remember brings the story that Rabbi Ashi is chazle b'shuka. Rabbi Ashi also, Malcham Avos appeared to him in the street. Amalei said to him, Asrach li klasin yam. He said, wait for me 30 days. B'hadjul li tamudai, and I'll be able to review all my learning. Namnitu, a famous saying, Asher mishabalakan, praiseworthy is someone who comes over with Talmud b'yadeh and his learning is in his hands, meaning like just like what's in your hand is available to you. So too, it's not enough just to know learning. It has to be something that you really can access. And b'yir klas nasa. So day 30, Malcham Avos comes back, and Amalei said to him, Michael, hi, malt azoi schnell. What's this? On day 30, you couldn't wait a little bit longer. So Malcham Avos said to him, Kadachka, you Rav Ashi, you're pushing away raglei the bar nasim, the feet of Rav Huna, who's the son of Nasim, of becoming the Nasi. Because you're the Nasi right now. And Rav Huna's supposed to take over. And no royalty, no leader can touch even like a hair's breadth of the other one. And you can't continue to live because Rav Huna has to take over, so therefore I have to come and take your life. Mar tells Rav Chizda, the angel of death couldn't get to kill Rav Chizda because his mouth did not stop learning Torah, and he's connected to life then. So the Malcham Avos went up. Yosef ba'arza beirav. He sat on a cedar tree by the yeshiva, and poka arza, and he broke the cedar tree. B'shasek, Sheshes heard this big crash, and he was silent. V'yochalei, and he was able to kill him. Reb Chia, lava motzel mekarbelei. Also Reb Chia, the Malcham Avos couldn't get to him. So Yemechad, one day, he appeared like a pauper, and also Tarv Abba comes knocking on that sounds pretty scary, right, on Reb Chia's door. Amalei said to him, Apikli Rifta. He says, can you give me some bread? So Apikli, he brought out some bread to him. Amalei said to him, doesn't the master have compassion on the pauper? So who gavra on that person, meaning referring to himself, on the Malcham Avos, said, why doesn't the master have mercy on me? That I was commanded to bring you to that world, and you're not letting me. So Galilei, he revealed himself to Malcham Avos. They showed him a rod of fire, so he knew that he's the Malcham Avos, not just some imposter. Make sure you got the right guy. He's going to take your soul, make sure you deposit it in the right place. And and he let him take his soul. That was these stories with the Malcham Avos. Dinner with Amid Beis, where the last mission of this Masechta, continuing with the laws of Moed and of mourning, which actually Taisus on the previous Mishnah said it seems interesting why we stuck in the laws of mourning in the middle of the Moed. It should have said afterwards. But be that as it may, regarding how Avelis then matches up with Chol Moed, Nashim, it's not necessarily women, but they on B'Moed, on Chalisha Moed, they are Ma'anos, which the Mishnah itself will explain what is Inui, but it's like an elegy, it's a kina, it's a lot of go ahead and like a small lament. Avaloi metaptis, but they cannot clap. And Rabbi Shloimy, he says, however, Hasmuchas Lamita, he says those that are close to the Mita, they metaptis, they could clap their hands. But Rosh Chodashim, now that's a Chol Moed. Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, B'Purim, which are lesser, Ma'anas umetaptis, they could do Inui and they could also slap their hands. But on both of those, loy mekoinos, they cannot make a lamentation, which the Mishnah is going to explain what's that different than ma'anos, which that you can't do on either one. Nikra hames, now but once the mess was buried already, then the lie is over. Loy ma'anos, loy metapres, then on Chol Moed you now do inui and you cannot do tipuch. Now it says the Mishnah, is there inui? What's considered inui? That's shekula and oinos ka'achas. That's all of them are lamenting together at the same time. That's not so severe. Kina, which is worse, is which is like a whole choir. That one of them speaks and the other ones respond to her. That's more public, that's more mournful, and that you can't do on Chol Moed. How do we know that's what it is? Because remember it says the pasuk in Yirmiyah, I'm going to teach your daughters that of mourning. The Isha Ru'usa Kina, and a woman to her friend Kina. So you see that Mekainis is when one woman is doing this with another woman. That's Mekainis that you can't do. Now, that's in this world. I will also love it, but in the future world, Hu Omer, it says in Yeshaya, which all Hespedim end with this pasuk, Bila Hamobis Lanetzach, death will be swallowed up for eternity. U'mocha Hashem Elikim dim al kapanim, and Hashem, God, will erase the tears from every single face, v'goymer, etc., which the pasuk, some people say the rest of the pasuk too. V'cherpas ama yasser ma'al kol haaretz, and the disgrace of his people is going to remove from on the earth. Ki Hashem diber, because that's what Hashem has spoken. Now, Tais actually points out, because we wanted to end with a good thing, as oftentimes Gemaras do that, Rambam does that, because Taisus actually says that Moed Katan is the end of Seder Moed. So although we have Chagiga afterwards, Taisus makes it sound like that this is the last Masechta of Seder Moed. So we want to end on a good note, so we say a Bila Mavas L'Netzach. Now actually, the Rabbi Yaakov Merlions, he actually says the reason why the next Masechta, not really, but the one right after the next one, the beginning of Seder Noshim, starts with Yevamis, starts with 15 women, which that's actually talking about where their husbands passed away without any children. That's talking about Yibum. So although we don't usually start off with Peronius, we don't start with a bad thing, but since we are continuing from the previous Masechta, which is Moed Katan, which talks about Peronius, because it talks about people dying, so therefore we're maskal, we say Peronius l'Pernosa, just like we say Nechamasa to Nechamasa. So that's why Yevamis starts with people dying, because it continues from Moed Katan, which is about people dying. If Moed Katan is the last Masechta and not Chagiga. So the Gemara says, Maya Maran. Okay, so you said that women could be ma'anos on Chol Moed. What do they say? What do women say when they are saying these these elegies? So the Gemara brings many different things. Amar Rav says that the women would say, Va'ila Azla, woe to the journey, Va'ila Chavila, woe to the deposit. So Rav Ranshberg explains in Eis Aleph, he says, woe to the journey that you're not coming back from that. No tefillas derech on the way back. And woe to the load, meaning to the deposit, where they're carrying such a load, which is the dead person. So that's what they would say. Similarly, Amar Rava, he says, Neshei de Shach Netziv, the women of Shach Netziv, which Rabbeinu Chananel brings, they were very wise, sagacious women. Amen Hachi, they would say this. They would say, Va'ila Azla, woe to the one who's going, because they ain't coming back. And Va'ila Chavila, woe to this load that they're carrying, which is, you're carrying this load of a dead person. V'amar Rava. Additionally, Rava says, Neshei de Shach Netziv Amar, these smart women of Shach Netziv, they would say the following enigmatic statement. Good garma mikacha, cut the bone from the tooth, which, like Rashi says, means to say that basically means that the jaws fall, because you're cutting the bone from the teeth, like the jaws are collapsing. And you bring the water to the kettle. In other words, the water is going back towards the top, towards the vessel. Now, Rabbeinu Chananel, he explains that differently. He says, cut the food from the teeth, and then you're going to have the hot water in the kettle. In other words, once you cut the food from the mouth of a sick person, then it burns in him a fever, and it warms up his urine like the heat of a kettle. As the Mishnah teaches that a kettle, even though it's emptied out, you can't drink from it because it's very hot. So either way, it's referring to someone getting sick and dying. Another teaching from Amar Rava says, the women of Shach Netziv, they would say, Atuf v'chasu ture, wrap and cover yourself mountains, because it was a very elevated and great person who passed away. Which Rav Ranshberg in his base, he says that, meaning cloak and cover the mountains in darkness, because this one who died was a very great person. And again, they would say it in more of these poetic types of statements. Additionally, Vamarava, he says, the women of Shach Netziv, they would say, shiur, which means wrap, Itztola de melasa, a robe of silk. In other words, death is appropriate, like a garment of silk, l'barcharen, to a free person, d'shlima zavdei, who has finished his food, meaning that he is a poor person, which is basically saying that he's poor and he dies, and that's the same way that that death is to that person as a silk robe is to a free person. But Rava says, these women of Shach Netziv, they would say by the Levaya, Rohet v'nafel, he was running and he falls, Amabar by the crossing, V'zuf Yosef, and he borrows. What does that mean? So Rav Schwartzberg says, meaning this merchant, he was hustling, he was running his whole life. And now he falls empty without any money by the crossing. When he wants to cross over from this world to the next world, he has to borrow money for tachricha. That's what the whole life is, running for money, and here he dies, and they got to borrow money for his burial shrouds. Another thing Rabbi said, that these women, they would say, Achana, brothers, Tagari, merchants, Azavzige, which is either his nest or his acquisitions, depends on the Girs and Rashi. Mivadku, he gets checked with at the end. What does that mean? So Rav Schwartzberg says, our brothers, the merchants, that they get checked with their acquisitions at the end, meaning let's see their wealth. For example, like this person who he doesn't have what to be buried with right now. Because again, that's also talking about a mess who died as a pauper. And the reason why these women, the Shach would say that people should have compassion on this person so that they can get him his burial shrouds and pay for his kvura and so on and so forth. Additionally, Rabbi says, in the women, they would say, Maisa ki Maisa. Death is like death, meaning every person dies. But being sick is chibulaya. That's the yisurin, is the interest, is the ribis on death. So like the actual loan, everyone's got to get that, but the interest, that's what the affliction is to death. Talking about the brayso, your May would say passing in kelas. Better to go to the house of morning time, base and mishter, than to go to the party, to the wedding. Not until where it says and those who are living should really put this to their heart and really think about this. What does that mean? What should he think about? Dvarim shel misa, regarding these things of death. What should he think about? He should realize the yisbad, if he eulogizes others, they'll eulogize him. The yikveh is going to help burying others, they're going to bury him. The yitan, if he'll carry their coffin, they'll carry his coffin. The yedal that is going to raise them, they're going to raise him. In other words, that he should lift up his voice in hesped, because then they're going to go ahead and be masped him and lift up their voices to be masped him. Now the big time, and those that say actually a slightly different version of the last phrase, the lo yidal, not the yidal yidlunei, the lo yidal, whoever does not lift himself up, meaning he's humble, yidlunei, then they're actually going to lift him up. Because if Seba says a pasuk in Mishlei, ki toiv amalacha, because better that they tell you aleheinu b'goymer, come up over here, come up to the podium, because he's humble, and as the end of the pasuk says, rather than they have to lower you. So those who lower themselves, they're going to be elevated. Related discussion of a levaya. So talking about people dying and being maspid. Talking about in the brayso, when the sons of Rabbi Shloimy passed away, so nichnasu dads came lanachma. So four Talmidei Chacham came to console them. Reb Tarfon, Rabbi Yisek, Rabbi Elazar, and Azar, Rabbi Kiva. Now Rabbi Tarfon said to them, look, before we go in, you should know that Rabbi Shloimy is a great sage. He's well versed in Agadic teachings. Let none of you talk into the words of the other one. Let everyone say their piece. And Rabbi Kiva, he says, it says, and I'm last. He says, I'm first, I'm last. Kiva says, I'm last. Okay. So Pasuk Rabbi Shloimy, who he was the mourner, he opened up first. As we know, he's supposed to speak first. So he said, how great are his sins. Tachfu Avelav, his mornings have been consecutive. Hitriach Rabbaisav, he's made his teachers go through the effort to come to console him. Parmer Shayna B'Shnir, because his more than one son passed away, so it's once and twice the second time. Okay. Then Rabbi Tarfon, who he was the Rish, he said, Pasuk in Yikar. It says, V'achechem kol beis Yisrael, and your brothers, all the Jewish people, Yivkas HaSefer, they're going to cry over the burning, which was the death of Nadav Avihu. So said Reb Tarfon to Rabbi Shloimy, said, it's a kabel chayma. Uman Nadav Avihu. If Nadav Avihu also elements achas only did one mitzvah, which Rashi and the Ksav Yad, this is all from on the next Amud, that on the day that they died, Nadav Avihu, they only did one mitzvah that was on the first day of the Chanukah HaMishkan, which that's where it says V'achechem kol beis Yisrael yifku, because the Chassidus says in the pasuk V'yikrivu b'nei Aaron as dam elav, that the sons of Aaron, they brought the dam to him. So they only did one mitzvah that day, and still we see that all the Jewish people are going to cry over their death. Of course, none of you were great tzaddikim, but we're saying that it seems to indicate that that's the one thing they did that day, and that's what they're crying for. So Banav Rabbi Shmuel, so the sons of Rabbi Shmuel, who they learned and they taught Torah and they did all these mitzvahs, all the more so that how we definitely need to be appropriate maspid them and eulogize and feel the loss. And then the music Lily spoke up and he said, quoting a pasuk Melachim Aleph, that all the Jewish people eulogized him and they buried him. This was the son of Yeravim, Aviyah. Only did one good thing. It says over there in the pasuk, yes, the reason why all the Jewish people were crying over him, because he had done a good thing. It was for that one mitzvah that he did that the pasuk is praising him and saying that all the Jewish people eulogized him because of that one good thing. And Kach, and all the Jewish people are mourning him. But the sons of Rishmal, Allah's going to become all the more so. Says that was the one good thing that Aviyah did. So actually we have two opinions. One says Shabitel Mishmartai, which the way it sounds like from Rashi is that Yeravim had put up sentries that people should not be oil regel, and he nullified that. But from Rashi Ksab Yad, it sounds like that Batal Mishmartai is like a term of Gedula. He downgraded his etiquette of being a king, and he was oil regel, meaning he wasn't bothered by what his father was bothered. The reason why Yeravim ben Nevat made sentries not letting people be oil regel because only Malchus Beis Davar allowed to sit in the Azar. And he says Malchus is going to have to stand, and people are going to see, and they're going to want us to go to Malchus, say Malchus Beis Davar is greater than Malchus Yisrael. So on that, he wasn't afraid of that, and he was oil regel. So because of that one good thing that he did, that all of Klal Yisrael was mourning him. The other one says that he stopped those centuries that Yeravim, his father, had made on the roads. The Jewish people not go up oil regel, and that's what he nullified. And therefore, that was his one good thing, and therefore all of Klal Yisrael mourned him. Then Rabbi Elazar ben Zari spoke up, and he said a pasuk in Yirmiyah. He said, "B'shalom Thomas, in peace, he will surely die. You will die. And with the burnings of your fathers, the kings, the earlier ones, before you, so they're going to burn for you." What that refers to is that they used to have a custom that they would burn all the belongings of the kings after they died as like a sign that no one could use your things. So you can have that same merit as your fathers, that you were such as a great as a king. Now, so it's a kabbalah. Only did one mitzvah, meaning near his death, and it was because of that mitzvah, which was Shehela Yirmiyah ben Atit, that he took out Yirmiyah Hanavi from the mud. Which, as Tosfos points out, of course, Tzidkiyahu was a tzaddik gomer, but in the pasuk we don't find more than just this one thing that he took out Yirmiyah from the mud and Kach, and still we see that he merited to have his stuff burnt like his father's and to die in peace. So Banav Rabbi Shmuel, the sons of Rabbi Shmuel, who they learned Torah and they taught Torah, all the more so how we have to mourn over them. Finally, the last one, and then Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Kiva spoke up and he said the pasuk in Zechariah. It says, "Vayimahu on that day, Yigdal HaMisped Yerushalayim, there's going to be a great hesped in Yerushalayim, Kemisped Hadar Dimon beBikat Megiddo, like the hesped of Hadar Dimon in Bikat Megiddo." Now, parenthetical, Bamar B'Yisrael, he says, "El Moed Targumid Ha'Krav." Not for the Targum on this pasuk, Lav Yedan, my come wouldn't know what the pasuk is saying because there is no hesped of Hadar Dimon in Bikat Megiddo. So rather, he explains it's actually referring to two different hespedim. Be'idna Hahu, in that time, meaning in the future, Yiskim Hesped B'Yerushalayim, there's going to be a great hesped in Yerushalayim, which a Gemara elsewhere explains that when the Yitzhara is killed, whatever it is, but there's going to be a hesped K'misped the Acha Ba'amri, like the hesped of Acha Ba'amri, the Kotel Yoseh Hadar Diman Bar Tav Diman. That's what I mean by Hadar Diman, that Hadar Diman Bar Diman killed Acha Ba'amri, and K'misped Yeshua Ba'aman, the Kotel Yoseh Parach Hagira, that Parach Hagira, who the Parach Lemon killed him Bikat Megiddo. So it's actually two different things. It's referring to one murderer and one other place, but it's referring to two different people having died. Now, we're picking the first one. So, if Achim, the king of the Jewish people, he only did one good thing. The Sibit says in the Pasuk about and the king who was gleising, he was in the throes of death. They put him into the chariot that the Jewish people shouldn't stumble, because he strengthens himself in the war so that the Jewish soldiers should not just run away because they see the king is dying, and he didn't want them to flee, even though that they had shot all the arrows at him. Noichach Aram, when they were facing Aram, and Kach, because that one good deed that he did, they were all maspid him, a great eulogy. So Banim Shabishmal, sons of Bishmal, it's going to become all the more so how we have to be masped. Now the Gemara wonders, we had brought in Amali Rabba Rabba Barmar. He says, once we brought in, so the Gemara asks on it. We mentioned before by Tzidkiyahu that he was told B'Shalom Thomas, in peace he's going to die. Problem is, except there's a pasuk in Yomi that says Ves'ini Tzidkiyahu Iver. They poked out, they blinded the eyes of Tzidkiyahu Hamelech. So how could that be called dying in peace? Amalei said to him, this is what Birchen says. Because Nebuchadnezzar was such a wicked Rasha, he died in his days. That's considered dying in peace, that he wasn't subdued by Nebuchadnezzar, even though yes, he died blind. Similarly, Rabbi Rabbi Bar Mari says, it says regarding Shiur Hamelech, Paskim Lachem Beis. It says, therefore I'm going to gather you onto your fathers. And you're going to come to your grave in peace. Now the problem is, except this Paskim Debriyam Beis, it says, that the archers, they all shot towards Melech Yeshayahu. And Rabbi Yehuda Marav, he says, they made him like a sieve, like he was like a strainer. That's how he died. So how could that be called dying in peace? Amalei said to him, Rabbi Yechon says, Shleichar Beis HaMikdash B'Yam. Because Beis HaMikdash was not destroyed in his days. That's considered dying in peace, even though he died with all the archers shooting at him. Another teaching from Rabbi Yechanan, going back to the halachas of Avelis, which, as we said in the previous story, Rabbi Shmuel spoke first. None of those who are consoling are allowed to say anything until the mourner opens up first. Because like it says the pasuk in Iyam, which the pasuk there it says before that no one was saying anything to Iyam, and the Ksibin it says that after that pasuk Iyam espiu, then Iyam opened up his mouth, and then only in the next paragraph does it say V'yan Alivas the Temani, who was his friend, spoke up because he didn't speak until first Iyam spoke up first. Amar Bavois in the nine how we know the oval sits in the front on the head. Shemek says the pasuk in Iyam. Evcha darcham, I'm going to choose their path. Be'eshe b'reish, I'm going to sit on their head. Be'eshken kemelech bagdud, and I'm going to dwell like the king in his troops. Kasha avela minachim, the way mourners that they console. So you see, like you're sitting on the head. Eshe b'reish is like the avelim are yenachim. So what do you mean yenachim? Achrini mashma. That sounds like others. Sounds like those who console the mourners. They sit in the head, not the mourner, but rather in the menachem. So Menachem says but Yinachim Ksiv. Although it's pronounced Yinachim, but it's written Yinachim, so the mourners who are consoled, they're Yeshem B'Reish, they sit in the head. Or additionally, Marzutra Mahachi brings a different source of Pasuk in Amos. It says Vesar is going to come, Mirzach, the mourners, Seruchim in excess. But the way it's expounded is, Mirzach is referring to a mourner because the word Mirzach is Mar, bitter, and Zach, which is like removed. So here you have someone who is bitter and removed. Nasasar lisruchim. So Mirzach is the mourner is sar, becomes a minister, becomes a master for the sruchim, for the rabbin, which is the excess. So you see that the way you read the pasuk is that he's the head and he sits on the top. Similarly, how do we know that the groom he also sits at the head? So like it says the pasuk Yishai, like a groom, Yichayin Pe'er, he'll be like he'll be the minister, he'll be glory like a kohen, which is my kohen, but it's just like the kohen sits in the head. Also the groom is in the head. Now the kohen goof, we know how do the kohen is in the head? Because the Rabbi Shmuel is a famous brayso of Rabbi Shmuel says the pasuk you should sanctify the kohen, which is the anything of sanctity. That Leftech Rishon, he opens up first to read from the Sefer Torah, Levarch Rishon, and to make the first one should do Birchas Hamazon, little money of Rishon, and to take the first good portion, which Taisa brings, not that he should take it, but that the Jew should give it to him, and therefore, just like the Kohen is the Chassan, so also we know the Chassan is Yesh B'Resh. Thank you, anytime, hosting.